As a member of the John Birch Society and the Convention of States, I feel that a bilateral alliance is essential for the preservation of our republic. Divided we fail as we have hitherto done, but united we all things can do. Few know the Constitution as well as the JBSers, and they would make excellent delegates or observers at a convention. Scorned by the progressive left, we are mocked, and they say, as the Roman orator and statesman Tacitus said, "Not indeed have we anything more useful against JBS and C.O.S. than that they do not collaborate on anything. Rarely will they meet to repulse a common enemy, and therefore when they fight separately, they are conquered all." Let's work together. Patriot ladies and patriot gentlemen, welcome to Dusty Friday at the mic. So as we're looking at this, here's another video that's got serious problems with a Convention of States, an Article 5 Convention of States, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. The beginning couple of minutes of the article, or minute and a half or so of the video, talks about some different things. Keep in mind, some of the information in that section is actually not a part of the C.O.S. project, the Convention of States project. Remember, we have 3 subjects that we're limiting ours to: term limits, balanced budget, and limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. So some of the things that the gentleman said up over here in the video, or that he'll say over here on the video in the first little bit, doesn't fully apply. But it should be pretty profound, pretty straightforward. So when you watch that first part, most of what he says is accurate. A convention gets called, delegates get sent, and then they debate on the subjects that the convention is limited to. Anything called outside of those subjects would be a point of parliamentary procedure. That would be out of order, Mr. President. And so, so this is pretty easy to understand. But he has a few other issues that he's dealing with. So let's take a look at this. So here we go, up right in there.
On the amendment or amendments mentioned in their applications. This sounds straightforward enough. However, there are many problems with this theory. For instance, where would the other 16 states fit into this process? Since those states did not submit an application, they would likely not impose the same limits on their delegates as the 34 states would.
All right, this is a fantastic question, but again, this just comes from a lack of common sense. I've watched a lot of the videos by this gentleman. He does a really good job. He's very knowledgeable, but on some things, he just lacks common sense. Okay, so if 34 states apply, let's say they apply with the C.O.S. application. C.O.S. is one of the first organizations to propose language to the states for their applications so that Congress can't go, well, the applications don't match. So C.O.S. actually proposes language for that. So if you do that, and 34 states were to pass C.O.S.'s proposed application, the convention is called with that agenda, with those limiting subjects. How is this not understood? States that call for a convention don't even have to send delegates. Once a convention is called, states that never sent an application are welcome to send delegates. That's how that works. What? Oh, the other 16, they wouldn't have limited their delegates. It doesn't matter. The convention is called under the points of the application. This is obvious. Every meeting in America, every parliamentary procedural meeting in America works on this procedure. The meeting is called with an agenda. They go through the agenda. Somebody brings something else up outside of the agenda. It either has to come, they either have to have room for new business, which C.O.S. does not, or if it's not, they go, point of order, Mr. President, this is out of order. And that's how that works. I don't know how this is so hard to understand. So states that didn't call for a convention could send their delegates, and those delegates would be bound the same way the other delegates would for the convention, even though they may not have sheets or authority list that says, here's what you're allowed to do. The convention itself is called under those parameters. So that's point number one. Point number 2, states that apply don't even have to send delegates. Just because you apply for a convention doesn't mean you have to send delegates. Now, I would highly recommend that you send, but you don't have to. 1787, the Philadelphia Convention that produced our Constitution, Rhode Island never sent delegates. Half of the states sent their delegates upwards of a month late. This isn't a problem. This is just how things work. We understand how meetings are. So let's go ahead and keep watching.
Convention promoters also claim the ratification fail-safe safety net would prevent any bad amendments from being approved.
This is an absolute truth. A 3/4 concurrence bar is a super high bar for getting amendments ratified. So when they say, oh my gosh, they could change this and all. No, we're calling an Article 5 convention. This is not a constitutional convention. Please look up let's see here, up there in the cards, and I will link a video that talks about a constitutional convention versus a convention of states. Highly recommend watching that. That will help you understand. But this is not a convention to write a new document. This would be a convention to amend the existing Constitution under the terms of the Constitution. Let's keep watching.
Ratification of any amendment needs the approval of both houses in 38 states. Promoters believe with this process, there is no way a convention could exceed these boundaries and become a runaway convention.
Yes, that is exactly what we say. There is no way that we could get 38 states to concur on radical amendments or doing away with the Bill of Rights or getting rid of the Second Amendment or getting rid of religious freedoms or the freedom of the press or the freedom of assembly or the right to an attorney or the right to not be seized and searched and all that kind of stuff. No, you're not going to get 38 states to do that. So yes, we do believe that this is a very good protection.
However, that is exactly what happened in 1787.
Now, this is where I get a little upset. So let me show you what I'm talking about, and we'll discuss it here.
Back then, the convention was also called as a limited convention to make changes to the Articles of Confederation.
That is not entirely accurate. So I love Mr. Brown. He's very intelligent, but on this subject, he is flat wrong. So where did the 1787 convention come from? The Articles of Confederation were woefully inadequate to govern all of the states. Madison and I think Hamilton, even in one of the Federalists or one of their letters, something like that, they even said we had no way of knowing what we would need until we tried to make it. That's totally easy to understand. So in 1786, they called a convention in Annapolis. Up here in the cards, there'll be a card to the Annapolis Convention. Go check that video out. It talks all about it. I'll briefly explain it here. In Annapolis, they got together for the sole purpose of amending the Articles of Confederation with respect to the Commerce Clause. So they said, we need to fix the trade and commerce of the United States. So the first thing that they did was they looked at the authority that they had. They found that most of the states had very similar authority. They said, we looked at it with our delegates and we looked at what permissions we had, and we didn't have enough. All we could do was revise the Articles of Confederation, modify the trade, interstate trade clause a little bit, and it was not enough authority. They went on to say, we're afraid that the problems with the Union are actually bigger than what we've all imagined. We need more authority, and we need representatives from everywhere. They said we were woefully underrepresented and we were woefully underauthorized to fix the problems. They ended up using a terminology called the exigent to meet the exigencies of the Union. Exigency is the key word there. It just means the necessities. They said the exigencies of the Union, we need to make a federal constitution to meet the exigencies of the Union. That's the authority we need. It was broad authority to make a new government, a new document. That's what they did. The Annapolis Convention in 1786 called the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. 5 states authorized their delegates to go to Philadelphia, and then Congress went, hey, we should get behind this too. Congress did not call the Philadelphia Convention. Congress threw its weight behind. But just like those fat, lazy, scum-sucking, eating off the pond scum people do back in Congress, even under the Articles of Confederation, they tried to limit what the people were doing. And they said, the only thing you're allowed to do is modify the Articles of Confederation. They said the sole and express purpose of modifying the Articles of Confederation. That's not what Annapolis called for. Annapolis said that's not enough authority. We need broad authority to make a new document, a new government. That's what they ended up doing. So when he says here, 1787 convention was runaway, no, it wasn't. Of the 13 colonies at the time, 12 of them ended up going. Rhode Island never even sent delegates. 12 ended up going. 9 had broad authority to make a new government to meet the exigencies of the Union. 2 had conflicting authority, New York being one of them. We'll talk about that later and why the Federalist Papers were written the way they were. One of them had very narrow authority, and there's no question Massachusetts overran its authority at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. However, Massachusetts did, in hindsight, go, you did the right thing. We didn't give you enough authority, but we're going to go ahead and go with it. This is what was important. The quorum, 9 of the 12, had the authority necessary, referencing either broad powers, broad authority, or the Annapolis Convention language to do what they did at Philadelphia. This was not a runaway convention.
The convention began with commissions from 9 of the 13 states binding their delegates to the ratification process outlined in the Articles of Confederation.
That's not entirely accurate. 9 of the states had broad authority, 6 of them actually referencing the Annapolis language, 3 of them referencing their own language, saying you can do whatever it takes to meet the needs of the Union, and then 2 of them had conflicting authority. In the conflicting authority, they referenced the Annapolis Convention, and they referenced Congress's language. One of the states, Massachusetts, had very narrow authority, and that one clearly overran, but the quorum had the authority. That's where the general authority to do what they did came from. Let's keep looking.
Months passed while many drafts and revisions were debated and voted on. What was intended to be just changes became much more.
It was not intended to be changes. If all they were going to do was change the Articles of Confederation, they could have done that at Annapolis, and they chose not to. This is the argument. If they're so dedicated to just, our founding fathers are just a bunch of authority overrunners, and they don't care what authority they have, they just run. Why didn't they overrun at the Annapolis Convention? Why didn't they just write the Constitution at the Annapolis Convention? Because that wasn't the case. They respected the authority the states had given them. That's the difference. They didn't just run away. They respected their authority. Let's keep watching.
Per the Articles of Confederation, the ratification process required unanimous approval.
This is correct. If you wanted to change the Articles of Confederation, you had to get unanimous approval. And guess what? That was ruining the Union. That was one of the exigencies that they had to overpower with more authority than the Articles of Confederation had. They had to go and say, look, we cannot make it unanimous in that respect. Now, they did make it unanimous in one respect, and we're going to talk about that because it's extremely important. They respected the unanimous, but they did it in a new way, and it was brilliant, if you ask me.
By all 13 state legislatures and Congress. This meant that just one state could block a revised constitution.
They were worried, the founders were worried, because Rhode Island was totally against this in the beginning. And they were like, we are not going to make a new union dependent on Rhode Island. In fact, the Union almost had to boot Rhode Island out. Could you imagine the entire United States with itty-bitty Rhode Island being its own country? We almost had to boot Rhode Island out because we were like, you have not ratified and you're not participating, so we're going to boot you out. They didn't end up, Rhode Island did end up ratifying, but it was years after everybody else. So let's keep watching.
However, with their new constitution, the convention changed the ratification process so that it would take 5 states to block the ratification.
Now that is just plain wrong. It doesn't take 5 states to block. It took 5 states to prevent the other 9 from coming together under a new union. Look at Article 7. It says 9 states have to ratify this in order for it to become active. However, it is only active between the states so ratifying the same. Take a look in the cards again at the state con versus con. The new Constitution, they knew it was a new document, they knew it was a new government, had to be unanimously agreed to by every state that wanted to be a part of it. Hamilton talks about that, the Federalist Paper 35, throughout it, and in Federalist 85, where he says, look, it has to be unanimous by all the states. It just takes 9 to start it. But if one state didn't want to be a part, all they had to do was not ratify. That was Rhode Island, almost didn't make it.
As history from 1787 has proven, even though there were strict limits on their power, those limits were ignored by the delegates.
That is not true. They had broad authority, and in the description below is a link to the different letters of conscription. They had broad authority. They knew what they were doing, and they did it the right way. They said, we got to make a new government. The Articles of Confederation is not going to work. We can't just change them. We need something new. And that's exactly what they did. They also recognized, as a new document, it needed unanimous ratification. But they wanted 9 states to be able to come together to form this new union. And anyone else that wanted to join was welcome to. We've had states join the union for the last couple of 100 years. I mean, we were up to 50. We started at 13. We started at 12. Actually, we started at 9. And then we've worked our way up to 50. So states are added all the time. And they have to assent to the Constitution. It's a unanimous assent for every state. 9 to get started.
The convention transformed itself into a convention of unlimited power, otherwise known as a runaway convention.
The convention did not transform itself. They had the authority from the states to meet the exigencies of the union. That was the Annapolis language. Annapolis said we needed more authority, and that's what the people did. I get really upset with this because what you're saying is that the founding fathers of our country were like, we don't care about authority. We don't care. We're just going to do what we want. If that's the case, why didn't they just make the Constitution in Annapolis? Why didn't they just let Annapolis run away? They didn't because they respected the authority.
Madison conceded in Federalist 40. In one particular, it is admitted that the convention have departed from the tenor of their commission. Instead of reporting a plan requiring the confirmation of the legislatures of all the states, they have reported a plan which is to be confirmed by the people and may be carried into effect by 9 states only.
Correct. It was to be carried into effect by only 9. Only between the 9. Anyone else that wanted in had to ratify. In that respect, it was unanimous. It was not just alterations to the Articles of Confederation. That was one of the problems. The unanimous consent was causing issues. You can never get everybody to agree. You'll never get everybody to agree. There has to be some balance between the majority, the supermajority, the 3/4 majority, and the unanimous. Some things require unanimous. In the United States, and I believe all 50 states, if you want to convict someone of a crime, you've got to have a unanimous consent of the jury. I agree with that. But when we're talking about the application of new laws, yeah, I think 3/4 is about right. However, a new document, not an amendment, a new government, a new document, that does require unanimous consent. If a constitutional convention, not a convention of states, if a constitutional convention came out and said, we're making a new document for the United States, I would say every state has to ratify that. Maybe it only takes 20 or 30 states to start the whole process, but if any other states want to be a part of it, they have to join it. That's exactly what happened here. They already had the Articles of Confederation. They were already a part of a central government. It just was one that wasn't working. So they made up a new government. They said, we can't just fix the old. Sometimes you have to just flat out make new. So we're proposing an Article 5, which is in the Constitution. We're not talking about a constitutional convention. Those are different meetings.
Many would think the commission should have been sufficient to force them to uphold the original ratification process, but they weren't. Yet just because the original ratification process was not upheld does not mean the Constitution was illegally adopted.
It doesn't mean the Constitution was illegally proposed. They knew they were doing something new and it required every state. Look again, Article 7. Check again my Constitutional Convention versus State Convention. It is so clear. It is so easy to understand. These men knew what they were doing. They didn't make a mistake and they didn't just shoot off at the hip. They knew what they were doing. They had the authority from their states. Meet the exigencies of the Union, and they did.
In Federalist 40, Madison suggests they acted upon the transcendent and precious right of the people to abolish or alter their governments, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Why did Madison say that in Federalist 40? Well, here's the problem, and here's what he's not telling you. Federalist 40 was a part of the Federalist Papers, all 85 of them, written by Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay to the people of New York. New York was one of the states that had conflicting authority. When New York sent its delegates, they said, you can only modify the Articles of Confederation, but you can meet the exigencies of the Union. That is a clear conflict of authority. Clear conflict of authority. There's no question there. So New York was in one of those gray areas, and they said, look, we have to convince the people of New York that this is good. We've got to tell them by what authority we did this. Clearly, the delegates of New York overran one of their authorities. Clearly, the delegates of New York did not overrun their second authority. So they had a conflicting place. That's why Madison said, we're appealing to the people. Notice no other states got letters, got Federalist Papers. Now, they all had ratifying conventions. They all talked about it. But the Federalist Papers were written because New York had conflicting authority. That's key to remember.
The Declaration of Independence declares this power of the people is a higher authority than the power of the states, Congress, or the Constitution itself. It was this power of the people which created the states, then through the states created the Congress and the Constitution. So, by appealing to the higher power of the sovereign people, the Constitution was legally adopted.
It was legally adopted, it was legally proposed, it was legally drafted.
This is a perfect example of how a modern-day constitutional convention could use this higher power to change the ratification procedure even further.
All right, and this he's kind of correct, but he's changing up the words a little. This is called bait and switch. He says, this way a modern constitutional convention could appeal to that power. Yeah, I agree. A constitutional convention could appeal to the power of the people. A convention of states as defined in Article 5 cannot. It is limited by the application. Our application is explicitly clear what we can and cannot do, what is and is not off the table. Everything regarding drawing power and jurisdiction away from the states and the people as described in Amendment number 10 is off the table. Everything with respect to drawing power and jurisdiction away from the federal government is on the table. So yeah, when he goes, a constitutional convention could have this kind of a problem. Yeah, that's correct. A con could. I don't want a con. I want a state convention, a convention of states where we get together and under the Article 5 propose amendments. This is a radical difference, and it is worth splitting the hairs over this, because if you just go, well, what's the difference between state con and a con? Wow, the founders would have thought there was a major difference.
So thinking back to the promoters' fail-safe ratification procedure, Is it really safe?
Yes, the ratification procedure is safe. That is the bar. That is the most supreme bar. And if we did come up with some kind of new government, let's say the Constitutional Convention or the State Convention totally ran away and did away with the Constitution and came out with an entirely new document. Every state would have to ratify that. So it wouldn't be a 3/4 bar. It would be a unanimous 100% all 50 states bar in order to obtain ratification across the union. Now, it may have in it that 20 or 30 get started, but the fact is new documents take a unanimous concurrence. State conventions take a 3/4 concurrence. And even at 3/4, with all of the different amendments proposed, we've only approved 27.
Let's take a lesson from history. At the time, the problem at hand was the Articles of Confederation and its many flaws. That is why the convention was called. When looking at our present Constitution, is the actual Constitution flawed, or is it just not being followed?
This is also a bit of a misleading argument. No, the Constitution is not massively flawed. The problem we have is the time-eroded rights. The time erosion, no one law, no one ruling ever being at fault. Little increment erosions of rights, of freedoms, of liberties, of states' jurisdiction for the people. As those have eroded over time, that's the problem. Congress today thinks they're being constitutional. And at the beginning of every bill, they cite their constitutional authority for that bill. So what we have to do is have a convention of states that goes and dials back the usurped authority by the federal government. We can't just say, oh, well, let's just start being 100% constitutional. They think they are.
Calling a convention will not fix the problems we are witnessing today. The real answer is constitutional enforcement. When the people understand the Constitution and demand adherence to it, politicians will either follow the Constitution or be removed from office.
Boy, wouldn't that be nice if it worked that way? Oh, all we have to do is understand the Constitution, and then politicians that don't follow it get removed. How's that working out with Nancy Pelosi after 400 or 500 years that she's been in? How long has that been good? How's that working with Chuck Schumer? How is that working with President Joe Biden, who was a senator for, about the time that the earth dried up after the flood? The fact is, these people are staying in power. We need term limits. We need to dial back the power they've usurped over hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, hundreds and thousands of Supreme Court rulings and little laws that slowly have eaten away at the rights and sovereignty of the states and the rights and sovereignty of the people. I hope that you'll let our statesmen or let our citizens come into your state houses and assembly houses. I look forward to working with you. Consider passing an Article 5 application as proposed by the Convention of States. Go to www.conventionofstates.com for more information. You can also go to my website, www.dustyfriday.com. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for watching that video. If you like that, remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe right up here. For other great content, take a look at our recommended video over here and see our playlist right over there. Remember to go to www.dustyfriday.com for great memes, news, videos, and my podcast available on all major platforms. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.